Hello and welcome to Techno Trek Tuesdays. I'm your host, Menhel Yunus, and joining me today is our wonderful guest hosts, Brandon Yon and Brian White. Welcome to the show, guys. Just a reminder to our audience, please subscribe, like, comment, do all the wonderful things that you do when you tune into our show. We hope you're enjoying it. Also, a reminder that we are on Anchor and Spotify, Facebook, Twitter. We have a wicked Discord app, and we're really happy to have you here. I just want to give a shout out to our main show, of course. This is under the umbrella of Trekker's Delight. And today we'll be talking about technology within Star Trek with our wonderful guest hosts and specifically discussing the past state of propulsion for space travel. Are you ready, boys?
Yep,
We're
let's
ready.
go.
And welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, as I said, today will be a first in a trilogy of shows. We will, of course, be talking about uh, propulsion of the past. And this will be the theme for today's show, leading up to, of course, the present. And introducing this concept will be. I'd like to, before we introduce the concept, just give a shout out to our guest hosts and give them a chance to talk about themselves and to introduce themselves. Can I start with Brandon? Brandon, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Been a long day, but it's going well. So yeah,
Excellent.
that's me.
And Brian, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm well. I'm well, actually. I'm excited for this conversation, which is
Oh,
unique.
so am I. This is definitely a very interesting topic, I think.
Yes, agreed.
We're gonna have a lot
So,
of fun with it.
yeah, I think so. I think so. So let me just kind of get us started on the overview of today's show. We're going to talk about past technologies that have allowed for rudimentary flight and limited proof of concept for space travel. And leading us up to that conversation, Brian, if you don't mind kicking us off, like where are we in this history of propulsion leading up to today?
Well, personally, I think if we're going to talk about where we are, first, I think we should talk about where we've been. And I think first we have to start out with, you know, before the dawn of time, mankind has always had a need to get from one place to another. Now, obviously, traveling long distances, walking didn't always cut it, so you had to have some other means of transportation. Animals goes without saying, but that doesn't really have much to do with technology, does it? So basically, I'm starting here with the steam engine. So the steam engine was basically mankind's first foray into travel long distances, and you know, it was one of those modern inventions way back in the day, but to us it seems kind of antiquated now. But then you go into things like, well, the internal combustion engine, which we still use to this day in most vehicles. Um, and that, started out kind of rough and rocky with the Ford Model T and things of that nature, but we've obviously made some improvements over the years. um, and then that brings me to electric engines, hybrid vehicles, things of that nature, alternate means of fuel and things. But then you get into the heart of the matter, which is like flight, jet propulsion, turboprops, things of that nature. When mankind learned to fly, we could get to where we were going faster and safer than ever before. And at some point in time, we decided that maybe traveling on this planet wasn't quite enough. We need to see what else is out there, which brings me to rocket propulsion. We have, plenty of history with rockets starting in, World War II and that particular era with solid fuel rockets where they were basically just loaded with gunpowder. But unfortunately, those weren't efficient enough. Then you have guys like Werner von Braun and guys like him who decided to use liquid fuel rockets. You know, and then at that point, it's as they say, the sky's the limit. But not really, because now we can go into space. And I think from that point, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon, and I think he can discuss a little bit more about the actual rockets themselves and kind of how they work and where they came about and things of that nature. So I'm gonna hand this off to you.
All right. Well, if we're talking about rocket propulsion, the Chinese actually had rocketry kind of in the bag way early on. Um, it was one of the things that they did, when they were first experimenting with gunpowder, like you said. But it never actually became into a propulsionary state until the early days of World War II, or the in between times between World War One and World War II, where technology was beginning to advance. And that's when Germany just picked up the torch and started running with it. They their first rocketry situation that was superior to everything else that was being developed at the time was the Opel RAK. And from that, we just went on from there. And Germany literally had the advanced rocketry technology. There really wasn't anybody standing between them and where they wanted to go. We all know that I believe the Rush. I'm trying to think of who was it. Help me out here, guys. You guys are my team. Who came up with Sputnik? That's the next
The Russians.
stage.
I
That
think
would be the
I
Russians.
think
I
I
figured
think
that
you're
was
talking.
the Russians, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't off
I think
base.
you're
No,
talking
no.
about a gentleman by the name of Konstantin Sikorski. He was the guy who first wrote about liquid fueled rocket engines.
There you go. And we had to shift from solid to liquid fuel due to the multi-stage necessity to actually get into space, which is what
Hmm.
required us to put Sputnik up there.
Right.
Now, that on top of itself just kind of blew away everything, because that's the beginning of the Cold War, you know, and just started moving into the modern era. The modern era basically starts in the year 2000 or the 2000 range, and that's what we're going to talk about next time. So our past is filled with every different type of transportation that you can imagine, because yeah, like Brian said, we've had to get from A to B. And when it comes to rocketry systems, we've had solid fuel, we've had electronic ignition,
Hmm.
we've had explosive ignition, we've had liquid uh, combustion, where they've actually tested two different chemicals coming together, combining with oxygen in the atmosphere. That creates an ignition system. So we're talking about different types of ignition systems for both solid and liquid fueled thrusters. The different types of thrusters, like if you look at the space shuttle, we've got two giant solid fuel boosters on either side. Those
Hmm.
fall away. Those aren't reusable. Those have to be remanufactured every single time, attached to the
Hmm.
shuttle, put back on, put on the pad, and relaunched.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the lack of reusability. So just consider how much effort goes into packing those cylindrical drums with
Hmm.
a solid fuel propulsion.
Yeah.
Now
Absolutely.
And
we're talking about modern. engines and modern RCS thrusters, even on satellites,
Yeah.
they're all liquid propelled because we
Mhm.
can take gases, jam them, and compact them and compress them into this little tiny amount, and just tiny puffs use, for RCS thrusters. We're talking about RCS thrusters. Guess what Star Trek has? Star Trek has RCS thrusters, fun stuff. It's required, and it's part of
It,
space travel.
yeah, yeah. I
And
mean, that's part of it.
Mhm.
exactly. And part of the whole system to get into space, we could take one engine and put it on there. We won't get to space, so we had to start going into multi-stage.
Mhm.
And how does that work? Well, you have a series of explosive bolts that are attached to certain apparatuses. You eject the fuel into one, you spend it out. Once that's done, eject the explosive bolts, separate the chassis, and you ignite your second stage.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Sometimes you'll do solid state, you'll do solid fuel in the first stage, liquid fuel in the second stage, and then sometimes you'll have a third stage, which is, you know, a
Mhm.
hybrid of the two. There's even types of jet thruster engines that are what they call them. What is it? What did we look at? It was
Hybrid.
called dual mode
Okay.
propulsion,
Mhm.
where it'll expend one type of fuel and then shift to a second type of fuel.
Mhm.
And
Interesting.
it's it's all about developing the technology for us to get into space, because
Yeah.
here's the interesting part. If you can get into space, there's no drag. So all
Right.
you're fighting is gravity.
Sure.
Yep.
So if you can get from the ground to space, then you get over to where you want to come down, and then you can land. Your transportation time will be significantly less. So yeah, A to B, even if you have to go through C to get there.
Mhm.
That's kind of the direction that I would go. I mean,
I
there's
get you.
there's so much to it.
It
Yeah.
really
Um,
is.
and then on top of the jet propulsion, we're talking, what can we do to enhance the thrusters or the rocketry? Well, we started investing in, like aerospike and aerojet engines
Yeah.
for super high altitude, because there's different chemicals in the atmosphere up there
Mhm.
that can be absorbed, kind of like the facade collectors in the nacelles. Hey, let's suck all that in, add it to the existing fuel source, and
Mhm.
we'll get even bigger thrust. It's not a lot, but it's enough that when used in the proper combination, you get these engines that can run on super high altitude at
Mhm.
super speeds.
Mhm.
And that's stuff that they were messing with back in the late 80s, early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. That kind of stuff is actually still in use today.
Right.
Mhm.
um, there was actually something proposed at one point, I remember, of the space shuttle being launched from an aerospike style engine apparatus to try to do away with the solid fuel thrusters necessary. But we didn't have the tech to reach that point, because we just you can't have an aerospike engine attached to something of that kind of weight.
Mhm.
It's
I
not
hear
possible.
you. Now, what I'm
Yeah.
hearing, and if I can interrupt, Brian, is there anything you'd add to that before I say something?
Um, Actually, not at the moment. He's pretty much said
Yeah,
everything that
yeah.
needs to be said there.
Absolutely, it's a great overview. Now, what has come to my mind, and I'm really not like too sophisticated in these types of things, but I mean, I can follow it well enough.
Mhm.
As I said before, I'm not an engineer, but my question is, why are we only using chemical propulsion systems up until the present? Is there a reason?
I'll let you answer that first, Brian.
Well, as far as let's see, the first of all, I think that right now we're still heavily dependent on fossil fuels and chemical fuels because they're easier to come by, and you can basically do what you need them to do. And I think
Hmm.
even if we were to develop more advanced propulsion means in space at this particular stage, I think we would still need chemical fuel in order to reach space. And
Right.
then we can use the alternate means of propulsion there. But right now, I think chemical fuel is, chemical fuel rockets is basically the best that we can that we can hope for at the present moment until we
Right.
can come up with something
Up to
better.
and including the president. Yeah. I
Right.
mean, I know that we're going to discuss in the next episode like some new stuff that's kind of
Right.
been kicking around the 2020s, and that's really exciting. But
Oh
up until
yeah.
about the 2010s, up until the 2000s, we just, it was these enormous three-stage or four-stage rockets that just peel away, and then never until you get to SpaceX, really, you don't really have reusable rockets, and
Correct.
Right.
it's just an enormous, enormous drag on the economy to like send,
Yeah, it's
and
an
that's why I
enormous
think
undertaking, an
yeah.
enormous expense. It's just a huge drain on resources in general.
And yeah, and so during the space race of the 1960s and then Sputnik, we talked about that in the 50s. There was this wonderful glimmer of hope. There was this wonderful like idea of like sending people up and walking on the moon. And now we're finding out that the moon has amazing resources, and we want to do
Hmm.
asteroid mining and all this cool stuff that people never all they thought about is like this picture of the future with hover cars and stuff. So what I would
Hmm.
ask you is like, given all that stuff, is there did you feel that the hope of like yesterday is different than the hope of today in terms of space exploration?
Um, to be perfectly honest, I think it is, and not for the better. Because I mean, as far as NASA is concerned, we've pretty much all but abandoned them. That we've cut their funding to the point to where even if they wanted to, they couldn't really fund any like expeditionary excursions into space. Um, which is why I think they've largely privatized it now. Because I mean, these rich people, they might as well use their money for something, and if it's going to be something to benefit mankind, so much the better.
Can I
But
interrupt you? Sorry, I want to
oh,
get
by all means, yeah.
Brandon's response to that because I wonder if he
Well,
disagrees or agrees.
here's the funny thing. I think it's a matter of perspective.
Mm,
I think a lot of the youth of today has lost sight on what the possibilities and the hope is for space travel and
yeah.
for space exploration. I was born in '84. I'm a '90s kid. I grew up with Star Trek. I grew up with the seeking out new life, new civilizations, the technology advancement, the experimentation, the hope for tomorrow. That is one of the things that I love about Star Trek is
Hmm.
the fact that it takes where you're at today and gives you a hope for the future.
Hmm.
And I'm different. I have never lost that hope. I believe that if we aren't already, which I will leave that to the conspiracy theorists, the people who talk about, the ancient aliens and the how do you pronounce it? The
The
Vimanas
Mayans
and
of the Mayans.
the Vimanas and the ancient the technology of ancient times, the flying
Sure.
machines. So I'll leave that to them. But I believe that we will get to the moon. We'll colonize the moon. I believe we'll get to Mars. We'll colonize Mars. I believe we're going to head out into space. And if technology keeps going the way it's going, we have a bright future out there. And there's a lot of stuff that I have to say about that, but that's for another topic, another time. Um, but the reality is, I never lost hope. I think there's
Yeah.
a future for us out there, and I
Okay.
think we need to push for it.
Yeah,
Fair.
like and like for me, in my opinion, sorry if I may interrupt.
No, I love
Um,
it.
see, for me, the whole phrase "go where no one has gone before" I think means more than just exploring space, because they're doing things that nobody has ever thought to do before with brand new technologies and just they're trying to expand their horizons on Earth as well as in space. Trying to better mankind, and by doing research and things of that nature, I think that that's basically what that means as well, is not just exploring space, going where no person has ever gone before in space, but also going where nobody's ever gone before in terms of scientific theory or exploration on, like, you know different technologies and things. So I mean that's just kind of my point of view on that as well.
Hey, well, I really appreciated this conversation actually because I got to learn a lot about early propulsion systems through our conversations. Um, it also gave me a little bit more perspective on where we are now, which is what we're going to get to in the next show. And it helped me also see like we our sophistication came in at a price. Like there was an
Oh, it
evolution
did.
to it.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and so we kind of take for granted that price was paid over the 19th and 20th centuries, and you had all these great minds that kind of like we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and now they come so fast, and we have such high expectations that we've kind of forgotten how long it really took getting from there to here.
Yep.
Just to put that, it has been a long road getting from there to here.
Really
Um,
has.
yeah, and that's why I've been using a lot of enterprise references for this episode because I
Right.
really enjoyed that opening sequence, and I was trying to
Oh
crop
yeah,
in a few pictures of that. So I hope you boys had a good time having this
Absolutely.
conversation.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Definitely.
Anything? Any last words before I sign us out of our first episode?
stay tuned for the next one. We,
Oh
we, we
yeah.
talked
It's
about
going to
better
be.
stuff on that one, and then the third ones were really punchy in the gut. So
Oh yeah. Definitely.
keep rolling.